So you definitely want to understand your state and local regulatory environment, and you want to do that before you decide what you're going to install, to optimize. It will really shape what you do, and it may unlock more opportunity than you recognized was available.
Welcome to BuzzHouse, a Baker Tilly podcast where you can hear all the buzz around multifamily housing, with all the info you need to help you win now and anticipate tomorrow. Hi, I'm Don Bernards, the partner in charge of Baker Tilly's multifamily housing practice.
And I'm Garrett Gibson, a partner at Baker Tilly, also specializing in consulting on multifamily housing transactions across the country.
Let's get started. The Inflation Reduction Act, or otherwise known as IRA, is hot off the press and a current topic throughout the nation, crossing, of course, many industries, including real estate, with some specific targeting towards affordable housing. Today, we're very excited to have our colleague here at Baker Tilly, Michelle Isenhouer Hanlin, with us on the BuzzHouse. Michelle is a director in Baker Tilly's Power, Renewables and Energy Practice. We are eager to learn a little bit more about the IRA and how Michelle is utilizing vast experience in the industry to help clients navigate its implementation. But first, here are a few industry updates. At the federal level, HUD announced that states will be receiving a combined $382 million through the National Housing Trust Fund. The funds can be used to help increase and preserve affordable housing for extremely low and very low-income households, including people experiencing homelessness. Eligible activities include real property acquisition, site improvements, development hard costs, soft costs, demolition financing, and other similar costs. In other state news, Rhode Island's Governor Daniel McKee announced budget proposals aimed at sparking housing development, including the creation of a state low-income housing tax credit. Again, as Garrett and I talk frequently about this, many states, I think the number's up to 20 or 21 states, now have a state low-income housing tax credit. Rhode Island state LIHTC would be capped at $30 million annually. 6 of the 8 states in the northeastern United States do have this state credit, including Connecticut and Massachusetts. Also, in New York, a bill was introduced recently in the Assembly which would make adjustments to the state low-income housing tax credit incentive provisions for rehabilitating properties, including making properties with 1 to 4 units or 1 to 4 residences eligible. This bill would define substantial rehabilitation being at least $15,000 per residence. Finally, I just left the Minnesota Affordable Housing Summit, and very excitingly, at the same time we were at the summit, the Minnesota Senate just passed a $1 billion housing package. The 70-page bill includes tens of millions of dollars for assistance for first-time homebuyers, additional money to preserve existing public housing, affordable housing infrastructure, and many other provisions. So a lot more to come on this. Brand new $1 billion in Minnesota, so very exciting. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Garrett to jump into our discussion with Michelle. Garrett?
All right. Thanks, Don. And thanks for that introduction and some of those updates, especially, looks like there's a lot more state credits on the states coming in. That's a good thing to hear. Welcome to the show. This is your first time on. It's great. So what we do, Michelle, is allow the guests to inform our listeners a little bit about their background. And obviously you work with us at Baker Tilly and maybe define your role within Baker Tilly for our listeners.
Thank you, Garrett and Dawn, for having me. This is my first podcast, so I am pretty excited to be here. I have been in power system development and consulting in the energy transition space for 15 years now, mainly as a consultant, but also as a project developer in renewable energy. Here specifically at Baker Tilly, I lead work in energy transition, helping clients optimize energy solutions to meet their needs, because everyone is in energy now, as we've found out with the Inflation Reduction Act. And whether that's decarbonization, energy resilience or reliability, cost savings, identifying and securing funding, for example, we're helping clients across the board with all of those things. I do a lot of front-end analysis, helping clients understand their regulatory landscape, design systems, optimize go-to-markets, things of that nature. And clients for our team run the gambit between, commercial and industrial stakeholders, municipal stakeholders, including schools, utilities, cities, and also real estate developers, including multifamily housing.
Awesome. That's a lot of coverage there. That's great. So why don't we go ahead and jump in our questions, Michelle? So just like Don mentioned, IRA, it's hot off the press. At a high level, go ahead and give our listeners really just like a quick overview and maybe what its intentions were.
Sure. Thanks, Garrick. So from an energy perspective, because again, I do energy. So the Inflation Reduction Act covers a lot of things. But from an energy perspective, the IRA gave us a lot more clarity that these incentives are here for a longer term. We had been piecemealing things together in the energy space in 2 years, waiting for it to get reappropriated. But now the timeline is 10 years. So you can go to market in the multifamily housing space with the security to know that you can plan on this for a while. You can make this part of your developments as you're moving forward. That is really helpful for planning purposes and budgeting and financing. The government also signaled that where you put these facilities really matters now. And by that, I mean these facilities in federally identified disadvantaged communities, which they refer to as DACs, are eligible for additional tax credits, but only if you're in those areas identified by the federal government. And the other thing that the IRA did for us was to unlock a great deal of funding in the form of grants and rebates, which your listeners may also be interested in.
Very good. Michelle, thank you very much for that overview. Michelle, again, as obviously we're talking all things multifamily housing, and I've had the pleasure, and Garrick as well, talking with you a lot about this specific topic. Can you drill down and get a little bit more specific into IRA provisions around multifamily housing?
Sure, Don. I would really put the IRA energy provisions into 3 buckets to make it easier to digest in the multifamily housing space. First is solar. Everybody's talking about it, so it's not news to your listeners. Captured under the investment tax credit, or ITC, housing owners can now capitalize on credits for rooftop and or carport, also ground mount if you happen to have some space available. But most of the time we're seeing carport and rooftop. And these credits can be stacked with low income housing tax credit, the LIHTC credits, to make solar even more attainable. The second bucket is electric vehicle infrastructure, known as the Alternative Refueling Property Credit, captured under IRS Code 30C, also provides a tax credit of up to 30% for EV infrastructure, so the charging stations. This is kind of important because we're starting to see some states roll out a requirement in multifamily, or a certain number of parking spaces you have to have EV charging. So it's important to understand your space, but also to know that those credits are there. And finally, efficiency. Efficiency is a bit of a different animal because incentives and rebates and deductions in these spaces are often pushed down to the states to administer, so it's a little less straightforward. In this bucket, you have energy efficient commercial tax deductions, which, unlike the solar and EV tax credits, do not offer a direct pay. They also have the much anticipated heat pump rebates. As I mentioned, this is up to states to adjudicate, but we anticipate a maximum of $2,000 per heat pump unless it's low income, and then you can secure up to $8,000 per heat pump. We expect the guidance out from the states around the fall timeframe. And on top of all of this, there are those other grants and rebates that I mentioned. So clearly a lot of opportunities unlocked by the IRA.
Very good. And a lot, Michelle, that was really good information. A lot, like you said, around affordable housing. And again, listeners, I think for your affordable housing properties, and even back to solar, I think 70, 80, 90% of low-income housing tax credit properties will have solar going forward because of all these benefits that Michelle noted. Michelle, again, a lot of great programs as it relates to multifamily, but maybe let's get back to solar. As you said, everyone is talking about solar and have been talking about it. Could you explain again? I'm sure people might have heard this, but I think it's good to hear it again. Kind of the buildup of what drives the solar percentages and the potential increases.
Sure. So I'm a super visual learner. This goes much better with a graph, but I'm going to try and break it down for everybody listening today. The solar ITC works as follows. If you have a system that's less than 1 megawatt, and that's most of y'all listening out there with rooftop and carport systems, then you automatically qualify for 30% as your base credit. Now, the caveat there is that systems larger than 1 megawatt have to meet prevailing wage to get that 30%. But again, if you're talking about rooftop and carport by meter, it's probably not an issue. So you can probably assume 30% tax credit that is after the facility is built and can be taken as direct pay. Then there are also what we refer to as adders, or these additional 10% credits that are available if you meet certain criteria. Those include, first, domestic content. That's 10% that can be applied if you're using Buy America. But honestly, right now, it's nearly impossible to meet this. So let's revisit it in a few years, 2, maybe 3, when the American manufacturing world has managed to catch up with all of these incentives. The second and third are 10% adders for energy communities, which means that they have a certain amount of coal and or oil and gas within an area, and environmental justice or low income. I want to caution your listeners on 2 things for these credits. First, this is based on a federal mapping tool and not on what you believe is low income. Like, it might make sense that your particular zip code or your site should meet these criteria, but it's based on very specific federal guidance. And 2, you have to apply for these. The guidance is not out yet for how to apply for these, but we do expect it to come out from the federal government this fall.
Awesome. I know everybody's expecting to get more guidance coming out. Obviously, we talk a lot about multifamily, especially in affordable housing, and you mentioned in your just description below that there's buildups there. So can you go into a little bit more detail on how one would go about determining if they qualify for that increase?
Sure. So I mentioned there are these tools. One is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, CEJST, for any of you trying to Google, and Environmental Protection Agency's EJ Screen. That's all one word, again, for the Googlers out there. They're both federal mapping tools that you can search your project's address to determine what areas the site qualifies as. So they'll tell you, yes, you qualify as this environmental justice, or yes, you qualify as an energy community. Now, at Baker Tilly, I also like to leverage a tool that we have here called Ever.Green, where you enter your address and it tells you exactly what you should be able to build up your credits as. And you can also use that site to sell your tax credits, to monetize them. So that's a really helpful tool.
Very good. Michelle, I know we've been talking a lot about the IRA and super powerful, super beneficial credits, grants, things like that. But I know when we've talked a lot, it's not every state is similar. And a lot of, I think, research that you're doing and work you're doing is really at the state level, looking at regulatory. What are some of those state regulatory issues that may arise that it's hard to know without looking into it?
Right. This federal system in which we live means that there are 50 different ways to slice this. And every state has different policies. And then every utility within that state adjudicates those differently. And if you add on top of that, your site is not in a large investor-owned utility service territory, it's in a small municipal, city, or cooperative utility territory, it adds another layer onto that. And this really predominantly impacts solar. So some states cap both the amount of solar that you can put on your facility and what pay you will receive for any solar that you generate in excess of what is being used. Because of this, you really want to make sure that you understand your state's regulatory environment right up front, as well as the local utility regulations, because it may impact the bottom line of what you receive and how much you can install. And then the other things to think about on the state regulation side are how they are implementing these rebate programs and efficiency programs that I mentioned earlier, like heat pumps. In the efficiency space, everything almost from the federal government, all that federal money is pushed down to the states to adjudicate, and then they in turn turn it around often and push it to the investor-owned utilities. So they don't make it easy for you necessarily to find what money is out there or how you can apply. Some cases we're waiting for all 50 states to tell us how they're going to implement the heat pump rebates. But you really want to understand what's going on in the state space. And the last thing you want to make sure you understand is what money is there in the state space. Because again, there's efficiency money, but there's also programs, those federal programs like the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI program. And if you're in a certain distance from federally identified corridors, there's money for electric vehicle infrastructure. So you definitely want to understand your state and local regulatory environment, and you want to do that before you decide what you're going to install, to optimize. It will really shape what you do, and it may unlock more opportunity than you recognized was available.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, up to this point, we've pretty much been talking about tax credits and other sort of tax incentivized items related to efficiency, et cetera. But are there any other non-tax credit or tax incentivized items in the IRA that we should be thinking about? Are there any grants?
Grants. We love grants here at Baker Tilly. We support a really wide variety of clients in identifying, applying for, and executing grants. The Departments of Energy and Transportation are giving out a lot of grant money right now. But as you guys know, money is never free. So these grant efforts are a big lift because there's a lot of money to be had. So make sure that you're picking the right grant for you and that you're prepared to engage the necessary resources on your team or to hire a consultant like us. Otherwise, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, if you will, because they are a lot of effort to apply, but there's a lot of money out there. And the important thing to note is that these grants are out there for low-income housing developments, net zero housing, energy efficiency, electric vehicle infrastructure, fleet electrification, you name it. So check these sites, engage someone on any of your consulting teams to keep you up to date on this because they roll, they change, they come back. If you missed it the first time, you always get a second bite of the apple at some of these right now. And they can really bring you over that cost hurdle. So it's important to look for those and to keep in mind that they're constantly coming out with new grant opportunities. They monitor all of them on their website, but they also, again, some of them get pushed down to the states. So keep abreast of those. There's a lot of quote unquote free money out there, and we want to make sure that you're taking advantage of those.
Michelle, we really just have one last question for you. And it's really, again, I've had the pleasure of being on a number of calls with you with our affordable housing multifamily developers. And we've looked at projects, right, kind of that are maybe haven't begun construction yet, or others that maybe we have clients that have portfolios of housing. But really, could you describe, like, what are some of the services that you've been kind of working on around? I think it's primarily a lot of, I've seen solar and so forth, but can you describe some of the scopes of work that so our listeners can get a feel for that as well?
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. So we do a lot of the front end analysis. I think I've spent a fair amount of this podcast discussing how you really want to make sure that you've incorporated everything up front, because ultimately you don't want to try and add this on the back end. You can capitalize on multiple credits at the same time if you're doing it as part of your planning. So we do a lot of front end analysis, design optimization, working with engineering teams. We do all of that regulatory analysis to really help you understand your space. And of course, all of the where can I get funding, whether that's what tax credits you qualify for, what grants you may want to apply for, what rebates you could capture, and then how to get there. So we can be life cycle support by helping apply for grants, apply for rebates, monetize the tax credits, et cetera. And again, we're happy to partner with other team members like the engineers that are designing the system to really help them understand what to look for, how to design energy efficiency to capitalize on the IRA, et cetera.
Very good. A lot of really good information. That's it for this episode of the BuzzHouse. A big thanks to Michelle Isenhouer Hanlin for joining the show today to tell us all about the IRA and how it affects multifamily. Once again, I'm Don Bernards.
And I'm Garrett Gibson. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. For additional resources around multifamily housing, check out bakertilly.com. If you have a suggestion for the show, email us at build@bakertilly.com. That's BUILD @bakertilly.com. See you next time on BuzzHouse.